And now, the worldwide phenomenon, Alex Moss, Burton DeWitt, join forces to bring you the weekly Dartscast 180!
Hello and welcome to a new episode of the weekly Dartscast, sponsored by Dartwolf. I'm Alex Moss, and joining me, my co-host, is the darts statistician Burton DeWitt. Neither of our countries won the World Cup of the weekend, but in a rare feat for this show, we did both correctly predict the winner. So, how have you been celebrating?
I mean, I really haven't been celebrating because despite the fact that a rare correct prediction from me, it was completely outshined by you picking France as the dark horses. And we were talking off air about it. I mean, yes, they got whitewashed in the quarterfinals, but that's one of those matches where the first leg really made a difference, missing 3 clear darts. I don't think they would have won that match, but I think it would have been a lot closer if they had broken in that first leg, and you would have had an even more remarkable weekend of tips. But I'm doing well, even if not as well as you. How are you, Alex?
I'm doing good, thank you. And we'll give a mention to you as well, because your dark horse, our unseeded dark horses that we picked on the show last week, you went with the Philippines, and they also made it through to the knockout stages and pushed Scotland a bit closer than France did in the end. And I think people are going to start thinking that we know what we're talking about after those predictions. We had some good dark horses. We both predicted the winner, and we're going to be taking a deep dive into the World Cup, our review of the tournament. But before we do that, we'll just give you a heads up on the guests that we've got coming up on the show this week. We've got Benjamin Drue Reus, one half of the Denmark World Cup team. He's going to be calling in to discuss an incredible debut that he had on Thursday night, 114 average. We'll also be chatting with a player that's going to be involved in the Women's Series this weekend, Roos van der Velde, a young Dutch player who's going to be in Hildesheim. She's going to be talking with our producer Hannah later on. But before that, let's start the show with a look back at the World Cup. Wales, as we've mentioned, becoming 2-time World Cup champions. Gerwyn and Jonny Clayton living up to their pre-tournament favourites tags, beating Scotland 10-2 in Sunday night's final. Do you see this being the start of a dominant period for Price and Clayton in the World Cup?
I mean, it very well could be. For starters, as I've said many a time over the last couple months, these are 2 of the 4 best players in the world right now. Form is temporary. Jonny Clayton was not one of the top 4 players in the world for the first few months of this year. He might not be again a week from now. But he's still going to be, at least for a little while, still a top 10 player. He is a bit older, obviously relative to Gerwyn Price, but he is, he's north of 50. And while, we're still seeing Steve Beaton and Raymond van Barneveld play fantastic darts a decade beyond that, it becomes more and more difficult, and the drop can come out of nowhere. Look at Mervyn King this year. Just 2 years ago, he was within a leg of winning a major. Now he's very often within a few legs of winning just a single match on a given weekend. That's how quickly form can disappear, especially as you become older, especially as it becomes more difficult to keep your concentration up. But I don't see that happening anytime in the immediate future for Jonny Clayton, especially since he's a player who doesn't seem anymore, at least, to put more pressure on himself than he needs to. I think he was a player who might have early on, before he realized how good he was, put a little bit of pressure on him to make sure that he got through to the events. But now that he realizes he's as good as he is, he plays more freely. And I think that will help him keep up this level for at least another 3 or 4 years, if not longer. And that means this Welsh team has a few years to go for it. The other thing that they have going for them is that they play really well as a team. And that's something that, we talk about it each year at the World Cup. We don't know how a pair is going to gel. It didn't matter as much in the past, because if you get out of that first round, you could go the rest of the way without having to play another pairs match till the final. And even then, you could lose that pairs match and still win because if you win 3 of the 4 singles matches, even losing the finals, the pairs match in the final doesn't matter. So the pairs didn't matter as much. Now it's obviously crucial. It's the entirety of this format. And the Welsh team, they're 2 good friends. They like playing with one another. They build up each other and they build off of each other. And that makes them a really difficult team to go against. Yes, they could have lost to Belgium. They very well should have lost to Belgium. Belgium outplayed them up until the very end of that match. But they figured out how to lift their game when they needed to and they won. And then they were no match for Scotland in the final. I don't think it's going to be a dominant era per se. I think it's too tricky of a tournament. But as long as Jonny Clayton and Gerwyn Price remain anywhere near their current levels, they will be a team that is more difficult to play than whatever their rankings might state. And that's because of how good they are together. I think we have another few years where they should be the favorite entering the World Cup. And even if they're not the favorite, they're probably the second or third most likely team to win it. And I think we will see this pair win again, maybe next year, maybe the following year, maybe both of those years, because I think they're just too good to not win at least one more, if not a couple more.
Yeah, I think we're coming into a really interesting period of this tournament, the World Cup. And before I get on to that, I just want to give a shout out to a few of our listeners. We said on the final day of the tournament, if you can go 7 out of 7, predict all 7 games correctly, then we'll give you a shout out. 3 of you managed to do that. So Willis, David Gannon, Philip Davies, they all went 7 out of 7. So congratulations to them. But back to this Welsh team, and it's not often me and you, Burton, we go into predictions for these events, we tip the same winner. But last week we were both in agreement when we recorded our preview show that for this World Cup, Gerwyn Price, Jonny Clayton, they were going to take some serious stopping, and they weren't going to be stopped. And that's exactly how it played out. And as you say, it's worth mentioning that things didn't go all their own way. Okay, they did in the final. It was a dominant win, 10-2. And I think last week I was saying I was hoping for a close final. I put the mockers on that. But every other round of the World Cup, we were treated to some very tight, dramatic games. And looking at the semi-finals, the game that was the most dramatic did involve Wales. It did go down to that last leg decider, and I think it was Kim Ibrex. He was waiting on 59. Jonny Clayton steps up, cool as you like, takes out 100 in 2 darts to put Wales through to the final. And at that point, you're thinking, was that the chance? Was that the game for the team, the favourites, to be knocked out of the tournament? Because we've seen it so many times in the past that the favourite, they'll go on and lift the title, but they'll have got through a wobble in the early rounds to get that far. So that was the scare that Wales overcome. But it's got to be said, they played some superb stuff the whole weekend right off the bat. First game up on the Saturday for them against Denmark, almost 100 average to beat them. Against Sweden, a minor scare, you'd say. They were 3-1 down, came back and won that one 8-5. And then the semi-final I just touched on there, a 96 average in the final as well to beat Scotland quite handily. Is this the start of a dominant period? I'm not so sure. I think we are already now a year off the next World Cup, so things can change that lineup for Wales. You'd imagine Clayton and Price, they're going to be number 1 and 2 for Wales for a while to come yet. And as long as they are, and they're still high up in the rankings, the bond they share that we've spoke about remains the same, then I think they are going to be the ones to beat. But beyond those two, you've still got some strong partnerships in there. And even the finalist, Scotland, Peter Wright, if he can find his form again, and with Gary Anderson, they're a contender for sure. I mean, you look at the weekend as a team, they weren't both firing on all cylinders, but they still made the final. And some other teams in there, Belgium, once they put their differences aside, produced some really good darts over the weekend. And Germany as well, how they dismantled England, the top seeds, that they're going to be in with a shout over the next few years. Australia, former winners. Netherlands, if Michael van Gerwen's back involved. If he's not, Dirk van Dijvenbode, Danny Noppert, they're going to be contenders. England, Nathan Aspinall, Luke Humphreys, if they come into the fold, 2 new players in the event. And Northern Ireland, okay, they went out in the group stage this year, but you'd imagine that one of the hot properties in darts, Josh Rock, is going to be in that team next year, and that's going to have an impact on things. So as much as they played well at the weekend, and they are going to be the favourites going forward, I think there's still a lot of teams that we can say are going to make it difficult for them next year.
Well, enough about the winners. Let's talk about the runners-up. Peter Wright and Gary Anderson reaching the finals as a pair for the 4th time before that quite heavy defeat 10-2 in the final to Wales. What do you think both players can take away from this run at the weekend in Germany?
Well, first of all, just looking at the stats, and I've got a few shout-outs on the show this week. Another one on Twitter for @TheRedBit180, who said that going into the final, Peter Wright was averaging 85.34, Gary Anderson 91.16. And I think for Peter Wright, you could clearly see that he's still not at 100%. And I was chatting with my nan the other day. She's a big Peter Wright fan. She watches the darts on TV. She doesn't go as far as to go on Twitter looking for stats or anything like that. But I was saying to her that Peter was averaging in the mid-80s for most of the tournament, and there was a time where he'd consistently have at least 10 points on that average. So he's clearly dropped a gear or two from where he was, but you could see that he's still fighting. And this tournament in particular, partnering up with Gary Anderson again, first time in 4 years, that meant a lot to him. And he said as much after the final. One of the first things he said was that it was amazing to play with Gary Anderson again. And the final, it was a step too far for them. We've just spoke about the Welsh team who were ruthless, particularly Jonny Clayton, 6 out of 7 on the doubles, a 103 average for him in that final. And 10-2, it's a very one-sided scoreline. Wales were deserved winners. There were a few chances in there that the Wales handed out to them. It could have been a different story. You look back to and these are the chances Scotland had. A 147, missed the double 18, a 158, missed the double 19. Tough finishes. They're not going to go every single time, but those were the scraps that Scotland had to feed off in that final. And very rarely, I think maybe once or twice, they were coming back in a leg where they had 2 shots, 3 shots at a double, a single to double combination. It was very tough going for them. But I think if you're Scotland, you've got to put that final to one side, hold your hands up and say that the better team won. But what they can take away from the weekend is what they did for the rest of the tournament, some key moments when they did produce. And in particular, I think for Peter Wright as well, because the game against Germany, the semi-final, Germany, they missed a bunch of darts to go 6-all. And in that pressure moment, Peter Wright steps up, takes out the 109 to go 7-5, then kicks off that next leg with a 180. Gary Anderson follows it with a 180. And at the end of the leg, when they're stumbling towards the finish line, Peter Wright takes out the 66 one dart tops. And that is the clinical Peter Wright that we know. So it is still in there. And with Gary Anderson, the last 16 against the Philippines, their first game of the tournament, Philippines were waiting on 46 to go 6-all. Gary Anderson takes out a 141, 7-5 up, and then they go on and win it 8-5. So I think both players could look back at the weekend and say there's moments in there of magic, and they've both still got it. And I think for Peter Wright in particular, he's got to take some belief from that coming into what is going to be, we've spoke about it a lot, a crucial second half of the year. Match play and World Championship prize money, title money to defend his place. He's number 2 at the moment in the world. His place in the top 10 is under threat come the end of the year. So he needs a big second half of the year. And Gary Anderson, as much as his form has been on the up this year, he's won on the floor. He's been back on the Euro Tour. This was his best run that he's had on TV for a while as well. So I think it's going to give him a bit more hunger. He won't be content to be runner-up, and he'll want to go one better next time.
Yeah, I think for Scotland, I don't think they can complain about having made the final because they were not the best team this weekend. That was Wales, but I don't think they were the second or even third best team. You know, I think if I were to say who's the second best, I'd probably go Belgium, who lost to Wales in the other semifinal, and the third best might even have been Germany, who they beat in the semifinals. But Scotland, as you said, they hit at the right times, at least up until the final. But they got lucky. You know, you look at that match against Germany. Germany missed, you mentioned to level at 6-all, missing, I think it was at 8 darts, but they missed 22 overall at double in that match, going 5 out of 27 on the finishing doubles compared to 8 out of 16 for Scotland. Included 4 legs where they were first to the double that they ended up losing. It easily could have been 9-4 the other way. I don't know what to really make of Scotland's week. You know, also throwing in that they got a bit of a fortunate draw going against our 2 dark horses in their first 2 matches, avoiding having to play Germany until later, avoiding Belgium, avoiding Australia, Sweden, and a few of the other teams that I think would have been more of a challenge to have had to face in your first match. Not that Philippines weren't a tough first match. Obviously it was. That was a close match most of the way. But they got a bit fortunate with the draw, and they never ended up averaging over 90 until the final. And yes, they did just manage to top 90 in the final, but that's a bad 90. That's a 90 where you're never really in it. You're not missing darts at double because you're not getting darts at double. You're clearly the second best team, and you're in essence scoring at 90. Pairs play is more difficult. 90 plus averages are more challenging to get. But you look, England averaged 93.5 and 94 across their 2 matches. Wales, just under a ton, 92, basically 96, and then basically 96 again in the final. Australia, in their knockout matches, 90 and 95. Those are the averages that the better team should be getting, and Scotland just wasn't. They hit when they needed to, and that win over Germany, yes, it was ugly at times. in terms of the quality of play and getting a bit lucky, but they did manage to win it. But they both need to play better than that if they're going to do exactly what you said they need to do. For Gary Anderson, that's claw back into the top 16 in the world. For Peter Wright, it's defend not just to remain number 2 in the world, but to remain in the top 10. He's defending world match play money in a month's time. He's defending world championship money in at the end of the year. Peter Wright is playing better right now than he was for most of the year. Gary Anderson, it's been a mini renaissance, but I don't think this run to the final is going to give them any confidence that they still can win titles. I think that's going to have to come from their other events and other achievements this year. Great job reaching the final, but I just wasn't that impressed with Team Scotland, and I don't think they were that impressed with their performances overall. So hopefully they don't take anything negative from it. A final is still £40,000 and a nice trophy, but overall, I don't think there's much positive to take from it. On the other hand,
well, we're going to be looking back more at the World Cup in a moment, talking about our MVPs, our thoughts on the new format. But before then, let's hear from one of the players that made a name for himself last week with that 114 average in his first game. He's one half of Denmark's World Cup team. Here's our chat with Benjamin Drue Reus. I'm pleased to say I'm joined by one half of Denmark's World Cup team, Benjamin Drue Reus. Thanks for the time, Benjamin. How are you doing?
I'm doing good.
Well, thanks very much for coming on. We're talking only a few days on from the World Cup in Frankfurt. You made your debut for Denmark. How do you look back now on last week and reaching the last 16?
I mean, I'm looking back at it with a proud feeling. Like, I'm really proud of what we accomplished throughout the few days we were there. Like, no one expected us to win over Austria, and especially not winning the group. So it's a really good feeling after our presentation.
And you mentioned that win against Austria on Thursday night. You caught the eye with that 114 average, individual average, a 4-2 win alongside your partner, Vladimir Anderson. When were you made aware of just how well you played? Was it straight after you came off stage?
Yeah, it was almost immediately after I came off the stage. As soon as we were done, I got my phone, I turned it on, and I already saw like over 20 messages that all mentioned my average and how well I played. So I was made aware of it as soon as I was done.
And it was a World Cup debut for yourself to remember, but it wasn't the first time that you've played on TV. You've been in 2 of the Nordic Darts Masters on the World Series, so did it feel any different up on stage in that first game? Did you feel more relaxed? Can you explain how you reached those high levels?
I mean, yeah, I would definitely say I felt more relaxed, but it also helped a lot that I had my partner with me up there. Like, he helped me to relax a lot. I would say he played a really big part of it.
Well, we'll come back to the World Cup later, but as this is the first time we've had you on our show, let's go back to the beginning for you in darts. And I was reading it was your parents that got you into the game. So how old were you when you discovered darts?
I mean, yeah, I would say I was around 6 or 7 years old when I first learned of it. And then every Sunday, my dad would take me and my sister to practice, where it was just like for fun and giggles. So it was first when I was 13 that I decided I wanted to take it more serious and start going out to play in competitions and stuff like that.
Yeah, you mentioned about the competitions. What was the dart scene like growing up in Denmark? Was there a lot of opportunities to play where you were, tournaments, leagues? Talk us through those early years involved in the game.
I mean, when I first started like in the youth competitions, there wasn't really like a lot of opportunities. A lot of the tournaments here in Denmark, they were only for seniors, and back then you had to place, I think it was within the top 8 of the youth ranking before you were allowed to play with the seniors. So there wasn't a lot of opportunities back then, so I played most of the time in the senior league.
Fast forward to 2017, a young Benjamin Reus is playing Scott Mitchell in your home event, the Denmark Open. What were those experiences like, testing yourself against experienced players like that?
I mean, I would definitely say it was like a great experience, like to see that it was a level that I could compete with if I just practiced more and gave it more time. So it definitely like helped me realize that it was possible. I just needed to put more work into it. But back then I wasn't that focused on like going far with the darts. So it was just I was just playing more because it was fun and less because I wanted to make it big.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's not until around 2021, 2022 that we see more of you in the Nordic and Baltic Tour. We had that long break with the pandemic before that, but in your late teens, early 20s, I'm guessing then darts was lower down on your list of priorities. Were you focusing more on school or work at the time?
Yeah, definitely. Like I had a lot. I was really busy with school. Like I had a lot of homework, so I wasn't having that much time to practice and like travel around. So I was only focusing on darts here in Denmark to see how far I could get here at home.
And you mentioned playing tournaments back home in Denmark. You had some successes winning the Danish national youth title in 2016. You had a deep run in the pairs of the WDF Europe Cup as well, representing Denmark. But what was it that's helped you the most in taking your game to the next level and going from around a 70 average to the 80s and the 90s?
I mean, for me personally, it was like I found a new happiness in playing. Like I almost found like a spark that I lost a few years ago that came back. So I'm just really enjoying like throwing every dart. I'm enjoying playing every game, like no matter if I win or lose. So I think that helps a lot that I just enjoy every moment of it, no matter what the outcome is.
In June of last year, you make your TV debut in the Nordic Darts Masters. What was that like, the build-up to playing in that event and then going up on stage in front of a big home crowd to play?
I mean, I was definitely nervous because, like you just said, it was my very first time, and I wasn't mentally prepared for it because it wasn't a part of my goal last year to go up there. I had just set a goal for myself that said I was trying out the Nordic Baltic Tour and then see how it goes. So for me to make it like on the big stage, like within half a year or something like that, it was just crazy. Like I wasn't fully mentally prepared for that moment, but it was a great experience, and it's definitely something I'm proudly looking back on.
Yeah, I was going to say, although the result didn't go your way that night, how much did you learn from that experience playing on the big stage for the first time, and did it give you that hunger to want to get back up there as soon as you could?
I mean, yeah, when I was up there, like I didn't really play the game I know I can, so I was definitely eager to go back on there to just show people what I am capable of doing. So I was definitely looking forward to be on the big station again and show what I really can do.
I've been reading some of your interviews with Daniel Tubal, apologies if I've got his name wrong there, from Dartscast, the website, and at the start of this year you said that you wouldn't be going to Q school because of your studies. Was that a tough decision to make, or did you want to put your work first and go to Q school when you can fully commit to the game?
Obviously it was sad that I'm bummed out that I couldn't go, but I always said that like working school is my first priority. So I always said that Q school, I will take it if I get the opportunity and have the time to do it. So the plan is definitely going like in January because I will most likely have the time this time around.
We've still seen you on the PDC's Nordic and Baltic Tour this year, and again making some strides on there. You reached a final for the first time a few months ago. How much has playing on that tour helped improve your game?
I mean, it helped me in the way that like difficult level, if you can say that, is much higher than here in Denmark. So I know when I'm up playing in the Nordic Baltic Tour, I have to be more concentrated and I have to really play my game almost every time if I want to make it far. So it definitely helped that I have a goal to practice for. Like I know I have to play around mid-80s every game to be able to win. So that definitely helps a lot that I have to focus of my training and through that raise up my own average.
and that final helps get you the second spot in that Denmark World Cup team alongside tour card holder Vladimir Andersen. When you found out that you'd done enough and you were in the team, what was your first reaction?
I mean, my first reaction was I was really proud because that was the goal I had set for myself this year, was to see if I could qualify for the World Cup. So I was definitely proud of it.
Said before the tournament that you and Vladimir, you're quite opposite. There is a risk that you two might not click together. So how was last week partnering up with Vladimir? Because it looked like you two got on.
I mean, it was a positive surprise for both of us. So we both, when we talked about it, we both agree and we both are fully aware that we are two completely different persons personality-wise. So we were both having our doubts about how we will work out. But we talked through it backstage and had a lot of fun moments. So that definitely helped a lot.
You two make it through the group stages before losing out to the eventual winners, Wales, in that last 16. But for you, how tough was it to come down from that massive high of Thursday night and that 114 average? And you mentioned about as soon as you got off stage, the messages were coming through. How many messages did you have on your phone that night?
I was having over 20. So it was definitely something I didn't expect, and it did set a mark on me. Like I felt, how can you say? I felt a lot more pressure. I put a lot more pressure on myself because I suddenly felt like I had something I had to live up to. So I was almost in the mindset that I was scared to disappoint if I didn't play almost as well the next game. So I was a lot more nervous and again not mentally prepared for all the attention I was getting. Like I never expected it, so that definitely also affected the other two games.
Yeah, we saw you got a lot more attention even here in the UK. You had an interview on the Sky Sports broadcast, but what about the other players that were in the tournament? They saw you throw that big average. Did any other of the players come up to you and acknowledge your performance from that first game?
Yeah, I had a lot of players come to me right after the game, come up and congratulate me, and also on the day after, a lot of players also came up to me when we arrived at the venue. They came up and congratulated me on the game and told me how good it was and how proud I should be of it.
Away from the World Cup, I also heard that your favourite player is Fallon Sherrock, and you play with her darts. We've just seen her awarded an MBE here in the UK. But for you, what is it you admire about her as a player the most?
I mean, for me personally, it was just the fact that she kept going like all the years. Like it's just women darts in general, knowing how hard it is for them to like qualify to like the men's competition, how hard they have it there. So the fact that she just kept going and believed in herself is something I really admire.
Even more people back home now after the World Cup, they'll see you as the top Danish player. So how do you try and cope with that level of expectation now that more people are going to know about you and know what you can do?
I mean, for me, I spend a lot of time just like mentally prepare for like the attention and the expectation that people will have. But in the end of the day, I'm a regular person like everybody else. I can have a good day, but I can also have a bad day, and those bad days should be allowed. So I'm not like focused too much on it, but I have thought about it a little bit.
That's fair enough. And there's one more weekend left of the Nordic and Baltic Tour that's coming up next month. But what else have you got your eye on for the rest of 2023 darts-wise? Any tournaments you're most looking forward to?
I mean, right now, like a goal for me is, since I'm still playing in like the VDF apartment, I'm hoping I can qualify for the World Championships and represent the Danish national team there. Like that's a huge goal for me this year.
Yeah, I was going to mention you've got the WDF World Cup that's coming up in September. It's going to be in your home country in Denmark. So what would it mean to you to be involved in that Danish team in your home World Cup?
I mean, it will definitely mean a lot. Also, since I never got to represent Denmark in the youth department, so it would mean a lot to get to represent Denmark this time around.
And then lastly, just looking further ahead, you touched on it a moment ago as well about Q School. You'll have gained some new fans after last week, so things being well, that the goal is January 2024. We are going to see Benjamin Drue Reus at Q School for the first time.
That's definitely something I have set my mind up for, so hopefully everything will fall into place and it will be possible for me to go.
We look forward to that. Before then, Benjamin, we wish you all the best. Fingers crossed that you'll be in the WDF World Cup and putting on that Denmark shirt again, and we wish you all the best for the rest of the year.
Thank you so much.
Thanks again to Benjamin for joining us now, continuing our look back at the World Cup last week. And we've got 2 questions of the week that we've been asking you on Twitter. We're going to give you our thoughts now. The first of them is, who is your World Cup MVP?
Well, we're not just going to look back to last week. We're going to also go back to the last question, because I realized right after I said it, I was thinking of last year's prize money. I said £40,000 to the runner-ups. Obviously, that's shared between the team. That was last year's. This year was up to $50,000. So maybe a little bit more to take out of the weekend for Team Scotland. As far as who's the MVP of the weekend, the options on the poll for those who haven't gone, and if you haven't, as of the time of recording, there's still 5 days left. It'll run through through this upcoming Sunday. Jonny, Clayton, Gary Anderson, Oscar Lukisiak, and Mac Elkin. Mac Elkin, of course, the manager of Belgian star Dimitri Vandenberg. But I think I have to agree with, right now, the runaway leader in the poll, Jonny Clayton. I mean, Clayton was just absolutely brilliant. And not that Gerwyn Price wasn't good, but Gerwyn Price, there were just a few moments over the course of the weekend where he showed a little nerve. You know, he missed 3 in hand and double in crucial times. If Wales came back, Jonny Clayton was going to hit first dart. And if Jonny Clayton missed 2 with the hand, he was hitting third dart. I just think Jonny Clayton had just an absolute brilliant tournament. And that's a big reason why they won the title. Some that aren't nominated, I mean, obviously our guest you just heard from, Benjamin Drue Reus. I'm not going to pretend like I had ever seen him play before, but he carried the Danish team, even though one of the 2 players, the other one, Vladimir Anderson's a tour card holder. And I don't mean that to insult Vladimir Anderson. I mean that just how good Reus was, throwing at one point 3 consecutive 180s, nearly not putting a dart wrong in their first match. And that's why they beat Austria. That's why they managed to get out of the group and into the last 16. I'm not going to make him MVP for the tournament because they lost in the last 16, but he was absolutely just brilliant at times, and those were the right times for them to win that group. And I'll mention just one more player, another one. I mean, they didn't win a match. They barely managed to win a leg, but he only was averaging 60 points more than his compatriot, and that was the Bahraini Basim Mahmoud, averaging 99 in his second match, averaging a bit lower in the first one, but his compatriot just couldn't take to the stage, it seemed. I'm sure he's a much, much better player than that, but playing in front of 3,000 fans and the nerve of representing your country got to him, and his partner was averaging under 40, but Mahmoud averaged north of 100. To do that on debut in the World Cup, in your first match on a televised stage outside of your country, and to do it in front of those 3,000 fans, and to give your country a fighting chance. Yes, it seemed like they were not going to really have a chance to win that match, but they hit a couple times and they won a couple legs in their second match, and they made Latvia not necessarily sweat it at one point early in that match when it was 1-1 and Bahrain had a chance to go 2-1 up and maybe mean the group wasn't over. But to make Latvia actually have to up their game and make sure they did enough to top the group, all on Mahmoud. I thought that was just a really impressive and deserves a shout out. But back to where we started, who's the MVP? It has to be Jonny Clayton. Wales, they might have won the title even without him. Gerwyn Price is pretty darn good, but Jonny Clayton, I thought, was just impeccable all weekend, and Wales are the champions as a result.
Yeah, some good picks there, and we should mention as well, It was a record-breaking weekend. We saw the record average in a pairs game go. That was courtesy of the two Christoph Kachuk and Christoph Ratajski, averaging 118.10 in their second group game, the win against Lithuania. And I was put a tweet out as well asking for people to send in their nominees for MVP. We had Oscar Lukasiak, who made it onto the poll. You had the two Christophs because of that performance. Massimo Dante from Italy, the Italians winning their first game in the World Cup. We also saw a first win for the Czech Republic as well. That was good to see. We had Karol Sedlarczyk on the show a couple of weeks ago. They were looking to get that first win, hidden Adam Gavlas. But looking at the four that we have got on the poll, you mentioned how the poll's going at the moment, and you've been voting in your droves as well. We've had more than 1,200 votes so far, which I think might even be a record for our question of the week, probably up there with the time that 99.9% of you voted that Bo Greaves is a world champion. But I'll start with Mac Elkin for this one, and Damon Hetter's been tweeting in saying, what did he contribute? Mac replied, about €80 a day to your food fund, and Damon's response to that was that it's been a cheap week for you. But in all seriousness, Mac's in there because of what he brought to the table. He brought the Belgian team together Thursday night. Dimitri and Kim, they were giving each other the silent treatment. Friday morning, Mac put them in a room together. They shook hands. They agreed to put their personal problems to one side for the rest of the tournament. And if we had a most entertaining team award, it would have to go to Belgium, because they had the two last leg deciders, the wins against Netherlands and Australia, and then another last leg decider. It was one too many in the end against Wales in that semi-final, and they were just 59 points away from knocking out the eventual champions in that last leg. But Mac, you say the manager of Dimitri is a former manager of Kim. He deserves a nod for helping provide us, the fans, with all that entertainment from the Belgians over the weekend, because I don't think they would have got that far if they carried on not talking to each other. And the other nominees, Oscar Lukasiak, one of many debutants in this year's World Cup, he certainly impressed. And I've got to give another nod to another darts statistician on Twitter, Premium Darts Data, did a tremendous job over the whole week. The tweets breaking down each player's individual average, the doubles, scoring. Do go and give them a follow as well. But Oscar's stats from the weekend, first game debut, fair to say that the nerves might have got to him, 72 average. They still won that game against Switzerland, but second game later on that day, settled down, 100 average himself, and that helped them beat Italy in a last leg decider to get through the group stage. And the last 16 averaged 93 in that one against Canada to win that one, and 88 against Wales, 63% on the doubles. He actually hit the double in all 5 legs that Sweden won in that 8-5 defeat. He was the one that got it back to 5-5. And as far as TV debuts go, he definitely deserves a mention, as does Gary Anderson. He did a lot of the carrying for Scotland in that run to the final. Peter came good towards the end of that semi-final against Germany, but it was Gary who did a lot of the lifting. But like you, I think the MVP usually goes to someone from the winning team, and for me as well, it's got to be Jonny Clayton. His averages over the 2 days that he played, 102, 96, 95, 103. That is 2021 ferret levels right there, and over 50% on the doubles for the whole weekend. There was a couple of games in there when he was 86%, 80%. Price said at the end, Jonny was the one to pick that trophy up. He won it for us, and you can't say any more than that. Jonny Clayton, World Cup MVP.
Jonny Clayton, World Cup MVP, 2-time World Cup champion. But now let's move on to our second question of the week, and it's how would you rate the new World Cup format? I think it's a pretty runaway poll. I don't know if this is the most runaway, but I'll let you talk about it after you say how you would rate it.
Yeah, our listeners are almost unanimously in agreement that it is a thumbs up for the new format for the World Cup. 95% of you at the moment with a thumbs up, 5% of you with a thumbs down, and a few of our listeners getting in touch with their thoughts. Thomas John Dockerell saying much better. The cream still rises to the top. However, the tournament was much more open than previous years. Andrew Griffiths, he says, great format, but extend to 48 teams and have everyone playing groups to earn their place in the knockouts. Craig Brown, stick with just doubles, but make the seeds start in the group stage as well. He's agreeing with Andrew there. And last one, Theo, amazing, best World Cup ever. Obviously missed the first one in 2010, but it was a huge revamp for the World Cup. I think the 3 key changes, and I'll go through them all individually, they were all pairs, group stage, and more teams. We had 8 more teams, up to 40, and starting with the all pairs, I've got to say I loved it. And yes, we did have that longer format because of it, because there was 1 game instead of 2 or 3. There were one or two more one-sided games. You had the Scotland whitewash against France. You had the final 10-2 in the end to Wales. But I think you are going to get the odd game like that in that longer format. You get it in any tournament. The World Match Play, you'll see a 10-2 or a 10-3. But on the flip side, you are going to see some thrillers. You are going to see these games go real deep. And we saw a lot of thrillers at the weekend, like the 3 games involving Belgium. And I think that's when you weigh it up, you take that all day long. You are going to take the odd one-sided game if you are going to get those thrillers where you get a lot more drama than you would in a best of 7 played 3 times. And I think having all the players up there as well just made the World Cup that more unique. It does really stand out. Now, when people say the World Cup, it will be, oh, that's the pairs tournament, isn't it? And for me, that's a really good USP for this tournament going forward. It's going to build more interest because it's not something you see very often on TV. You are now guaranteed to see the pairs, whereas the old format, as we've said before, you could go whole sessions without seeing a pairs game. I think the group stage is a format. I'll come on to the increased number of teams in a moment, but having 3 teams in a group and the way they set it out, so the losing team from the first night played the next session, I think that meant every game in that last round of group games had something riding on it. And okay, there was some with less riding on it than others. There were some teams going into that last game, they needed maybe 1 leg or 2 legs to go through, whereas the majority of the group games at the end, it was winner takes all. Winner went into the knockout stage, the loser went home. So I like the way they set that up with the groups. And I think other events, we see a group stage, the Grand Slam, that's 4 players in a group. You do sometimes get a lot of dead rubbers towards the end, but we didn't get that here. And I think the only gripes that I was seeing on social media, and that some people were saying with this revamped World Cup, is 40 teams too much? Is there enough strength in depth in darts at this level to have 40 teams in the tournament yet? And you mentioned him a moment ago that the Bahrain player averaging 36 and 39, not a good look for the event. But on the flip side, and it was crazy to see this stat afterwards, you had that player averaging 36, his partner, Basim Mahmood, averaging 99. Have we unearthed a hidden gem there in Basim Mahmood? So it's tough. You want players and countries to get these opportunities, and travelling all those miles, just going from playing in your home country to then the bright lights of the stage, the big crowd, that's a huge difference. And it can take some getting used to play at your best level. But I think there probably needs to be more qualifiers introduced. Maybe with Bahrain in particular, you hold a qualifier in that area with Cyprus, Turkey, Egypt, UAE, teams like that. And the other sticking point, just lastly, the protection for the top 4 seeds, getting a bye to the last 16. I think if the PDC keep this current format, which I like, then one day I think you've got to expand it to 48 teams, have 16 groups of 3. You throw those top 4 seeds in with everyone else at the start. But I think at the moment, as it's 40 teams, I think you've got to keep it as it is. I don't think there's too much you can change. And overall, it's been a great tournament. The changes, they've worked well.
I'm in complete agreement. Even, I think that's a good point that you made, that, or at least I guess you won't say that you made it, but you attribute it to other people, that is there enough depth to sustain 40 competitive teams? I think there's an argument that there weren't 40 competitive teams this weekend, but most of them were pretty close. Even some of the teams that weren't fully up to snuff were competitive in at least one match. Thailand, returning after a decade out, they took Croatia to a last leg decider in their second match. India won 2 legs on Canada. Bahrain won 2 legs on Latvia, who topped the group. Those are, 3 of the probably 5 worst teams in this competition. I didn't mention Iceland, and they won 2 legs in both of their matches as well. Yes, those teams weren't up to par. Those teams did struggle, but they weren't that far adrift. The only ones that really were adrift were Ukraine, who didn't win a leg, although they still averaged 74 nearly in their second match, and Guyana, who averaged south of 70 in both their matches. So I think you could say that there were 38 teams that were competitive at the World Cup. Maybe there were, of those 38, a good half dozen or so were a cut below, but they were competitive. And if they're competitive, then what's really the problem? Look, the FIFA World Cup, well, it's going to 48 teams now. It's been 32, but there's usually 1 or 2 teams in that 32 that aren't competitive even at the World Cup, in a sport that has tens of thousands of world-class players, because it's played all over the world, and it has so much money in it that it encourages people to start playing from the age of 4. So if the FIFA World Cup is not going to have every single team at their World Cup really be competitive, even though most of them are, I don't see the problem that you have a couple that aren't competitive, but you're adding representation. And you know what? Guyana earned their right to be there. They won through a qualifier against a Brazilian team that might not be the best team in the world, but has proven itself at least a competitive team in the past. So I just don't see that as being a problem. I think 40 is probably the number it should stay at for some time. I think the ideal eventually would be to get it up to 48, because that way all 16 seeds will have to play from the start, and you could have 16 groups of 3 as opposed to just 12 and giving 4 byes. But I think what this proved is that we're not quite there quite yet. I think we'll be there in the future. There are countries that have been in the World Cup in the past and have players capable of representing them that aren't there this year. Greece is not there. Slovenia and Slovakia aren't there, even though they have been there in the past. Malaysia's been there in the past. And we know the Asian Tour is now back up and running, and I think we'll probably start to see some Malaysian players or players from other places in Asia that show that maybe there's more countries that can represent in the future. We're not there yet, but I think that's coming in the future. And I think the 40 worked. I always thought the doubles play throughout would work, the pairs play throughout. I think that was just something that makes this tournament different. Obviously, representing your country makes it different. But beyond that, when it was mostly singles play, other than what shirt Dave Chisnell was wearing, it was seemingly like every other tournament on the calendar. It's not anymore. And the pairs play works, and it makes this event so much more what it should be, which is a team event. I don't really have any complaints. I think this is the format it should be. I think it worked. I think it worked fantastically. It made it the most entertaining and the most intriguing World Cup in quite some time. I think there's ways to improve in the long run by increasing the number of countries, maybe even moving this out to be a full week event if the calendar allows it. That way you can have some longer matches, or you can have 4 teams in each group or something, so that you're getting more matches, getting more time on television. But again, that's something for the future. It's not there yet. Where the game is right now, this is the perfect event, and they did it exactly right. I agree with almost all of our listeners, the 95% who approved of this format. And I usually am someone to at least find something to critique. There's really nothing. This was exactly what it should have been.
Well, if you are one of those 5%, do get in touch. Let us know why you weren't a fan of the new format. We'd like to get your thoughts anyway. But we're going to move on to the Women's Series coming up this weekend. Before we do, let's hear from one of the players that is going to be in Hildesheim this weekend. She is a former winner of the Dutch Open Girls title. Here's our chat with Roos van der Velde.
I'm joined today with Roos van der Velde before she makes her trip out to Hildesheim. Thank you so much for your time, Roos.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right,
it's a pleasure.
First question I've got for you is just generally, how did you get started in darts?
Okay, so my brother started playing darts first, like when he was around 11, I think. And he just saw it on TV, and he practiced and practiced. He wanted to throw an 180, and then after a few years he played his first tournament, first big tournament, and I was like, I'm watching, but I want to try. And I didn't even practice or something, and it was not good, but I really liked it. And then I was like 12, I think, when I started practicing, and I was 13 when I was a bit serious about it and tried to get to the bigger tournaments. And yeah, that's how I started, because of my brother.
Yeah, and so your brother Jurjen obviously got you started. How has his success with the PDC and his advancement at such a young age affected kind of yours? Do you practice against each other or anything?
At first, yes, but his level became higher than mine, and eventually it just wasn't fun for him to practice with me anymore because he didn't have like the resistance anymore. So we were like, we just gonna practice separately, and we're both okay with that. So now we practice not together anymore, but yeah, it's just very cool that he is now on such a high level, and yeah, I'm very proud of him.
And you won the Dutch Darts Open girls category in 2022. What was it like to win that?
It was amazing because a few years before that I also was in the final, and I didn't throw that well, and I got the second place. I was the runner-up against Leila Brussel. And that year I won, and I got over my nerves at the last double, and I was just very proud of that. And Jurjen was cheering in the crowd. He was at the front. He was looking at me, giving some tips to me. Just take your time, drink some water, and just go for it. And then I threw the double one, and then I won against Marlene Klutsch. And yeah, it was an amazing feeling. Like you win on one of the biggest stages, like in the amateur darts world. So I mean, it's like you were so nervous, and then you throw the final double, and you were so relieved that then it's done. And yeah, so much feeling at that game.
And then, of course, after that, you also tried out the PDC Women's Series. How did you then generally find the adjustment from youth darts to women's darts?
So, yeah, it was like a big change. But like in my environment nearby, I already like through some women and men tournaments, but not on that scale like it's international, just in my surroundings. So I knew what it kind of was to play against older people, more experienced people, against men, and it was great to have like a bit of a step up to the women's. And last season I got the first place at the ranking at the girls of the NDB. That's the Dutch ranking system. And yeah, after that I had to change to the women, and I'm now the third in the Netherlands at the women. And yeah, I just step by step it goes better, and I try to like get my game better at the women's series, but it's not, you can't compare it to like the Dutch national ranking, because it's so much bigger. There are so many good players out there, and yeah, the level is just higher. And of course we got some big names here like Anka Zelstra and Aline de Graaf, and those are like also doing it well at the women's series. But to get to that level, it takes a lot of practice, a lot of time to like get experience to do it well over there. And it's getting better and better, but sometimes I'm struggling with my nerves, because I'm just very excited to play every time, and sometimes I'm putting too much pressure on myself because I really want to do it well, because I mean it's the PDC Women's Series, like the best players of the world are there, and you want to prove yourself that you're part of it. And yeah, it's a lot of like the environment is just so professional, and yeah, it just takes a lot of practice to get there, but I think it's getting better. But I just need to practice more and just experience those things more. And yeah.
Yeah, and you were saying with the NDB, because we were going to mention that, even even though you're right now third, you were first before the last weekend. So, I mean, you've been right up at the top of those rankings. For those who aren't particularly familiar with the structure of NDB tournaments, what is that like? Do they have a lot of events? Is it all over the Netherlands regularly, or is there smaller sessions? Just like roughly, what is that like as a setup?
Okay, so everyone can enter if you're participate in a province darts corporation, if I can say it like that, and then you enter the NDB, and it's all over the Netherlands. This season there were like 6 tournaments, and yeah, it's just you get points every time. I think it's the regular way, like counties, like people in England know, I think. And yeah, what can I tell more about it?
Yep, so it's kind of got a county structure, and then anybody that takes place in that takes place in the larger events for ranking points.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Like, if you're, like, in the top, you can get in the national team. In our country, it's like the first 3 are immediately in the national team, and then the best 2 Dutch players in the WDF ranking. And then it just goes from like, how good you play at the international and national tournaments. Yeah, and I think the Dutch top is like getting bigger because the level is going up. And we have now many good players like Noah Lynn, Anke Zijlstra, Eileen, It's great that it's also going to be bigger in the Netherlands.
And then also, if we look away from that, where you're saying that it was quite exciting to get those rankings, and obviously, as you said, you put in a lot of hard work for that. What does a typical week look like for you when it comes to darts? Do you play in your local league? Do you practice every day? You're 18, so how does that look?
Yeah. Now the summer is starting, so the competition is over, but we always had like that Tuesday night competition. Like we had a league with our team, and normally in the weekend 1 tournament, or like I'm not practicing every day, but I try to play like 1 time in 2 days. So I practice for like 1 hour, and then I try to keep my level up with the tournaments in the weekend and like the Tuesday night competition, because that's a great training, if I could say that.
Yeah, and then last year you finished 77th on the PDC Women's Order of Merit. This year you're already at 57th. How are you finding adjusting to long double tournament sessions where there's 2 in a day?
Oh, yeah. First it was like, oh, that's a lot, But then after a while, I was like, okay, I have to store my energy and just try to focus. In the meantime, I'm not playing, because sometimes you have to wait a bit longer than you're used to. And then I was like, okay, I have a rhythm, and that's how I just try to get along with the 2 tournaments a day. Yeah, it's sometimes it's hard. After a while, it gets better. I mean, it's also experience.
And when you're on the tour, who are your best friends in terms of going to the women's series? Because obviously most of the events are held in England, with the exception of the one in Germany. So who do you travel with, hang out with?
So sometimes I'm traveling with my mom. So I'm going with my mom to Hildesheim. But when I travel to England, I'm going with Quinty and with Noah Lynn. And of course, the Dutchies are always there. And it's also always a lot of fun with them, because we have like a bit of a Dutch group. There are a lot of Dutch players always, so that's fun. And I think Noah, Lynn, and Quincy. Yeah, but yeah, it's always fun to get to know more people, and I'm always open to talk, and yeah.
And Noah Lynn is pretty darn close to the cutoff for the Women's World Match Play. Obviously, we got this last weekend before cutoff. Are you thinking she might be able to make it?
I hope so. It will be so great for her. I mean, it's crazy if she's gonna nail it. It will be so cool. I hope it's for her.
How are you finding balancing darts with, just your normal social things? You said there's less tournaments now, but I mean, you're 18, you still have school things that you're doing, you still have friends things that you're doing, but also to advance your game is quite a lot of work. So how easy is it to find a way to balance all of those things together?
Okay, so an agenda is one thing. Now I'm still in my internship. I have to go to my internship from 8 till 5 every day. So sometimes it's hard to balance it out. But it's going well. It's just planning. I plan a lot nowadays. At night, I'm just going to the gym or kickboxing, and sometimes before that I'm gonna practice an hour, and then I go to the gym. Yeah, with my social life, I'm just can always FaceTime or call somebody, and in the weekends, I mean, I have still time enough to see people and just see them, and yeah.
Obviously, you're quite young, and you've been playing since you're even quite younger. I say this as an old lady myself, but already in just the past few years, women's darts in general has advanced so much to where there now is a PDC Women's Series and women's match play when there wasn't one before. So if you had to take a guess on what might happen, or even what you hope might happen, what would you think the future may hold for women's darts in the Netherlands, let's say?
Hopefully, there will be more players. It will be more maybe more like the football, because the Oranje Leeuwinnen, the women football players, just did well at the World Cup one time, and then the popularity of football went up. And hopefully somebody from the Netherlands also can do that with darts, like a good tournament that it is seen all over the world. And if there are little girls seeing that, I want to be a darts player, or I want to do this, more motivation, and hopefully that there will be more girls players, and then they grow to the women and just get a bigger top of the players. Because I think it started with the girls, and hopefully there will just more women players. That's the whole thing, and just get the level higher and maybe mixed with the men or something like that. Because I think if women want to play the best they can, they have to play with the men, because the men level is already high, and if you're gonna mix it over the years, it will be better. But first, I think it will be very hard. But then after a while, I mean, it goes up and up and up. So, I'm curious what's gonna do in the future. But yeah, I don't know. I actually don't think they're gonna mix it, but that would be great for the level overall.
And then also for the future, what goals do you specifically have for your game? Whether it's statuses in tournaments, whether it's just to continue to grow, or maybe someday represent the Netherlands. What are your own personal goals?
Yeah, so I'm actually in the national team right now at the ladies, and it will be great if I stay in the national team for at least a few more seasons. And the women's series, one thing, I want to get my nerves under control, because that's a really hard thing for me. And yeah, just enjoy my game. And yeah, I mean, that's the most important thing, just enjoying the game. Because otherwise, if you don't enjoy it, you can't keep up with it. Your level is not going to be higher. So hopefully I will still like it in the future and just, yeah, get better and better. And also like playing with the men at my pub close by and just, yeah, play more tournaments at the men and just get my level higher because of that. And yeah, I'm really focused on the women's series right now, the NDB, and maybe some WDF tournaments nearby, like Open Belgium, Open Germany. Yeah.
Excellent. And maybe someday beat your brother again?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. No, I don't think so. It's very hard to get a 2-card as a woman. Only some did it. So, yeah, I really need to improve my game to get to that level. But who knows? Maybe in the future. But that's not really my goal. It's step for step. And then we see how it goes.
Sounds good. Well, thank you so much for your time and have a great weekend in Hildesheim, and I hope it goes well.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks again to Roos for joining us. Now we'll finish up the show with a look ahead to what's coming up this weekend. And it is the last weekend before the calf for the Women's World Match Play. We've got 4 more Women's Series events taking place in Hildesheim. But how many spots do you think are still up for grabs for Blackpool, and who could sneak in?
I think realistically, it's just the last 2. Obviously, if Lisa Ashton and Fallon Sherrick, one of them has a really bad weekend, doesn't show up for the weekend, and there's title split among 3 players right behind them in the rankings, one of them could fall out. But that just seems like a bit too much of a stretch. It's going to have to be a perfect storm of events. And considering that Lisa Ashton and Fallon Sherrick are pretty decent players, I just don't see that a perfect storm happening, which means I think that leaves 2 spots up for grabs. And that's 7th place Aline de Graaf and 8th place Lorraine Winstanley. Winstanley is just 50 pounds ahead of Noah Lynn van Leuven, who, of course, made her first final at the last women's series in the final event. And she's just right behind Lorraine Winstanley and 350 pounds behind Aline de Graaf. Katie Sheldon's right there as well. Laura Turner, who made back-to-back finals a couple years ago, is still right there within a final of making it. Kim Holden, Anka Zylstra, Priscilla Steenbergen, they're also right there within a final of a spot. Granted, that's assuming that Winstanley goes out early. So there's a lot of players right in that race to move into a spot if they have a good tournament. And there's even some a little further behind who are good enough. You know, Corinne Hammond has been struggling this year, but she's in 20th place. She's 1,300 pounds behind, right there with Anastasia Abramoslova, who hasn't gotten to play in all the events. But now if she's going to enter this weekend, has a good opportunity if she can find her best stuff. Another dark horse there as well, Almudena Fajardo Ayuso, the Spanish player. She has a lot of work to do. She's 1,450 pounds back. But if you look at the averages, she's actually the player who has the highest average who's not currently in a spot. She's 7th in averages on the women's series this year, half a point ahead of Noah Lynn, and she's coming off of a very, very good weekend at the last series, on the second day at least, making it to the semifinals, losing out to Laura Turner in a last leg decider, and then making a quarterfinal in the next one. And, you know, she had wins that weekend over Rhiannon O'Sullivan, over Lorraine Winstanley, over Katie Sheldon. Those are good scalps, and she's playing really well. I mean, as I said, average-wise, she's the best player currently outside. And she keeps getting better the more she goes to these weekends. Earlier in the year, she beat Lisa Ashton. She's beaten Dita Hedman this year. She's a very, very good player. And yes, a final won't be enough, but she's a good enough player to make 2 finals this weekend or to maybe eventually win a title. I'm not saying she's going to get in, but there's a lot of players even further down that are in that conversation. Will de Graaf, will Winstanley hold on? It's tough. I think de Graaf will. I just think she has a little bit too much talent. She very rarely goes out early. Her earliest exit this year is last 32. That's happened a few times. She hasn't had many deep runs. That's why she's not safe quite yet. But she keeps picking up money. And if you keep picking up money, if you keep going fairly deep into tournaments, you keep putting the pressure on everyone else. And especially since it's blind draw, that means you'll start to pull away from some players who get unlucky draws. I think Aline de Graaf will do enough to hold on. Will Lorraine win Stanley? I don't know. It's when we started the show, she was the number 1 ranked women's player, and she still was a very, very good near the top of the rankings up until the pandemic. She just hasn't taken to the PDC circuit quite as well as some of the other top players who were top players before the pandemic, and we haven't seen her find her best stuff. That said, she made a semifinal back in February. She made a quarterfinal back in February, a pair of last 16s the past weekend. She is improving. She is getting more deep runs than she had in the past. She has to be considered the favorite because she's currently in that spot. But I don't know if she'll hold on, especially with Noah Lynn playing so well right now, especially with so many players right there in that conversation to get into it. I think it's 2 spots up for grabs, but I think there's a dozen players who it really wouldn't surprise me if they filled those spots. And that includes people as far back as the number 23 player, because the women's game is really deep right now, and it's only getting deeper.
Yeah, I can't argue with that. And I had the number 23 down on my notes here as well. Almudena Velde.also, someone that has really started to make a name for herself. I'm going back to last year when she made the final of the World Masters women's event. She beat Mikuru Suzuki on the way to that, lost to Bo Greaves in the final, but also that week in Assen, she won through the qualifiers, the last chance qualifiers to get to the World Championship. Again, another win against Mikuru Suzuki in the final. Also beat Kasumi Sato, another player that I rate very highly. So regardless of how she gets on this weekend, the spots in the Women's World Match Play, we are going to see her at Lakeside at the end of the year. And she's someone that is making some big strides forward. And as you mentioned, she missed the first 8 events of this qualification period for the Women's World Match Play. She didn't play in the 8 events for it in 2022. She's played in the first 8 for this year. And okay, it's easy to say, what if we double her tally from what she's got from the 8 events she's played to give us what she would have in the 16? That would be $2,500. She'd be right in the mix. Who's to say if she'd have played in all 16, she'd have got even better? She might already be in those spots. So I think it's difficult to say that she's going to get in if she makes a final early on, maybe the first event or the second event. She is going to be in the mix going into that final day. So I don't think it's too far to say that Almudena could have a say this weekend, given what we've seen from her this year and into the back of last year. But in terms of the spots, I'm in agreement. I think it is 2 spots to play for. I think those top 6 are going to be in Blackpool, and I'll try out my classic line of they can start to book their B&B for Blackpool. They are going to be at the Winter Gardens. So you're looking at Bo Greaves, Mikuru Suzuki, Rhiannon O'Sullivan, Robin Byrne, the top 4, all players that didn't make the event last year for one reason or another, just missed out, or in Bo Greaves' case, didn't play the Women's Series up until that point. So they're going to be there. Fallon Sherrick, Lisa Ashton, a little bit further back. But I think the gap between the players outside is going to be a bit too much for them to catch up. And, okay, Fallon and Lisa, they've only got 1 final between them on the Women's Series so far this year. You'd imagine that's going to change pretty soon. They're going to start to find their form, and they are going to make some more deeper runs because they are still 2 of the best ladies players in the game. But aside from that, we've both mentioned Almudena. I mentioned Noah Lynn Van Leuven as well. I know you mentioned her on our last preview of these Women's Series, someone that could make a big push forward and get into that final on the last event of the last weekend. She is very close to that top 8 now, £50 off. And again, that's a few wins. I think she's right in the mix. I think she's going to make it. I think she'll be the one that's going to push into those spots, and it will be either Eileen de Graaf or Lorraine Winstanley to fall out. So yeah, I think we're going to see some changes this weekend. We are going to see Noah Lynn make it into that top 8. I'm not quite sure which one she's going to replace. I think we are going to go down to the final event. I think there's going to be a few players that are going to be in the mix for this, but I do think it is going to be Noah Lynn. I think she is the safer bet at the moment, given how the players are playing form for this year. She's going to be the one to make it to the Winter Gardens.
Anything else for this week?
Well, as always, we've got to say a few thank yous at the end of each show. Thank you to our guests for joining us, to Benjamin, to Roos for joining us, to our producer Hannah, Daniel as well for their help with those interviews. Thank you to our sponsor Dartwolf. If you want more Dynamite Darts content, head on over to dartwolf.tv. Give Dartwolf a follow on Twitter as well, at Dartwolf180. Thank you to everyone for listening. Thank you to everyone who interacted with us on Twitter over the weekend. I was in my hotel watching the darts, so it's nice to chat with a few of you while the darts was going on, and what a great tournament we were treated to over the weekend. And next week, all things being well, I'll be in my new studio here in Bolton, so I'm looking forward to that. But before then, before next week's show, we have got some darts to follow. We have got the Women's Series this weekend, a big weekend for a lot of ladies trying to get to a very special place, not just the Winter Gardens, but Blackpool as a whole. What a place. So good luck to everyone involved, and if you can, make sure you enjoy the darts.
Yes, always time to enjoy a little darts. The next 2 weekends are big weekends as we do the cutoff first for the Women's World Match Play in Blackpool, and then the World Match Play in Blackpool after the Euro Tour event at the end of the month, beginning of next month. Let us know anyone you want on. We'll be covering both World Match Plays as July approaches. We'll try to get some of the players who are in that field, whether they're debutantes, whether they're return players, and we'll try to get some more coverage. The summer is upon us. I won't say it's the best time of the year. That's, of course, winter for the World Championships. But, who's going to complain about nice weather, at least when we're not inside watching darts. So hang tight for while you can. Get outside, enjoy some of that sunshine when you don't have anything else to hang tight for, because why not? It's summertime. And we'll see you guys next week.